Academica Media. Welcome to Teach the Way They Learn, expert insight on educating all students. And now your host, Liliana Salazar.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to all of our listeners to Teach the Way They Learn by Academica Media. My name is Liliana Salazar, and I'm so happy to be the host of this amazing podcast. I've been on a little hiatus, running around doing so many things and working on many activities in my professional career, but I am glad to be back, and I am back with someone spectacular. Just as a reminder, the mission of this podcast is to discuss teaching strategies and how they can be the most effective in reaching all groups of students. This podcast will challenge you to put aside tradition and comfort levels and encourage you to embrace different techniques that might be more beneficial for all, and I mean ALL, capital letters, students. There will be times where it will only be me, and there will be times where I will have phenomenal participants to share their experiences in improving academic outcomes for all students. And today is that day. I have my brother from another mother with me today, Dr. David Calvo, that is going to be talking to us about Chat GPT, because David, that is all I hear about. So I want to make sure that I did a podcast on it. But before I ask David to do a welcome message, let me just talk to you a little bit about this amazing, not only friend and brother, but amazing educator. And that is what this is all about. Dr. David Calvo is a student-focused educator who has served the needs of diverse student populations for over 2 decades. David just recently earned his doctorate in global executive from the University of Southern California. Woohoo! Entering public education as a teacher assistant, he has been the principal to 4 school campuses, from pre-K to adult education, from public to charter to private, from brick and mortar to hybrid and virtual, from domestic to overseas. His work has spanned across multiple school districts, including half of the 10 largest in the country, state and federal agencies, and ministries of education abroad. Wow, that is just so amazing. I think when I grow up, I want to be like David Calvo. His relentless public education reform pursuits have yielded improved educational opportunities for children and families. And most importantly, he just recently started a phenomenal position with the California Association for Bilingual Education, called CABE. He is the director of family and community engagement. And this is such a wonderful position for him because he is a believer of civic and social responsibility. And part of this job allows him to be able to do that. And just going back to the fact that he now has his hands where he can improve educational opportunities, most importantly for families, and making sure and equipping our families to be able to work with all of our students. So David, I give you the floor just so you can welcome all of our listeners after my very long hiatus. I've been trying to get to this, but you know, David, how our lives get, but I'm so glad that you're on. David?
Sure. Thank you, Lily. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Such a wonderful introduction. And yes, education is my passion. I have been fortunate to be now in the education space 27 years. And throughout that time, really focusing on equity and providing equitable outcomes to children. And I'm so fortunate that you and I have had the opportunity to present at conferences and talk about the intersectionality of emergent bilinguals and children with disabilities. And so I'm really happy to be back on the show today. Thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely. And again, David was on early in my podcast career. So when we put this link up, Ross, which is my amazing producer, Ross will say hi when he has a chance. But I always want to give a shout out to Ross, my amazing producer. We'll go ahead and put the link of when David was on my podcast a little earlier, a few years ago. So David, Chat GPT. Oh my goodness. Everywhere I go, everywhere. I mean, I hear about it in the schools. I hear about it on the news. I'll be talking to individuals in conferences and I hear Chat GPT all around. So I just want to unpack it. What is Chat GPT and why does it matter? And I know that you are so involved in this artificial intelligence arena that I felt the best person to bring on board would be David. So let's just start with the basics and let's get this conversation going. What exactly is Chat GPT?
Sure. So, Lily, I've been so lucky to have come across Chat GPT in December, less than a month after its launch. And I have been using it since, and I have been sharing with friends and educators and colleagues and everybody since then to
and let
really...
me interrupt. Thank God you shared it with me because I was one of the first people you shared it with. Thank you very much, Dr. David Calvo. Go ahead.
Sure. So, Chat GPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's an artificial intelligence chatbot that's able to communicate with its users. And when we think about like Siri and Alexa, but in a written format, and it's more comprehensive, it can create code for a variety of software. It can synthesize information that you request, summarize information, compose books, music, poems, personal messages, speeches.
Wow.
Like just last month, very impromptu, I was asked if I could provide a speech at an event. And normally I might be a little bit reluctant about answering, that kind of question within moments' notice. But I said, sure. I entered a few inputs into Chat GPT on my phone, made a few changes after that, did a couple of edits, and like in 5 minutes, I had a speech that I was super excited to deliver.
And I'm sure you got great feedback on it, right?
Oh yeah. Everyone said it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates expressed just this year that Chat GPT is going to be just as important as the PC or the internet. In other words, like its impact to human society.
Just think about that statement. First, that it's coming from Bill Gates. So, wow, it's coming from a very credible source, right? But second, that it's going to be that important as the PC. I mean, just think about what just the access to a PC and the internet has done just for our lives, our general lives, our social, economic, but then think about school. So what a very powerful statement. And I think that, Bill really summarized it. So now that we're talking about Bill and how it's going to be so important, why is ChatGPT important?
Well, ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. In February, it set the record for the fastest growing user base of 100 million users. Now, think about this in comparison. It took TikTok 9 months to do that and Instagram 2.5 years to achieve 100 million users. But just this past April, ChatGPT had 1.8 billion monthly visits. This explosive use might even be partly due to it's free. It's readily accessible.
And I think that that's the beauty behind it, right? Because so many times, unfortunately, when new initiatives or new things come out, they are very expensive. And some subgroups or some, for example, students or in low SES or families from low SES don't have access to something that is such a game changer. So hats off to the creators of ChatGPT, making it so accessible and free to everyone that wants to use it. So thinking about, we're going to go world, and then we're going to get a little closer and we're going to, start narrowing down into the classroom, right? So
Sure.
Why is, thinking about, you just explained why ChatGPT is important and how quickly it's like taken over the world almost, right? What does ChatGPT mean for the world?
Well, Lily, there's going to be societal paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
Particularly in remote parts of the world, and even here in the US, in rural America, oftentimes those of us that are in the metro cities or urban cities don't think about rural America, but there are still places that have limited access to the internet. But now all of a sudden, this internet is going to be amplified with artificial intelligence. How far we've come from the internet days. And, Elon Musk just recently tweeted that the singularity is near.
And when we talk about rural America, and I know I want to unpack a little bit about the singularity is near. I want to unpack what Elon Musk was tweeting about. But I just want to remind all of our listeners that when we're talking rural communities, we are talking about rural communities also in America. Because I know sometimes we think that worldwide, right? But in America, there are still so many rural communities and many educators that work in rural communities and schools that really, it makes it very difficult. I mean, for many years, we took on a rural community a few years ago, Jefferson County in Florida, and definitely when the pandemic hit us, just the fact of trying to get internet access to be able to educate all of our students during the pandemic was an amazing obstacle and challenge. And it wasn't because we didn't have the technology, it's that there were not enough
Infrastructure.
internet posts to be able
Towers.
to internet towers, right, to be able to get them to our students. So this just I just want to put that in perspective for our listeners, because there are still so many communities and so many, and hats off to all of the educators that are listening that work in rural communities. You all definitely are wearing many, many caps. So hats off to you. So going back to Elon Musk's tweet about singularity is near, what does that mean?
Well, Lily, the singularity is like this hypothetical future point at which technology becomes potentially uncontrollable and irreversible. And there's going to be changes to human civilization in unknown ways. Kurzweil, who published The Singularity is Near back in 2005, is getting ready to release The Singularity is Near. And for the audience members who might have watched the movie The Imitation Game, this is where Alan Turing, where he's showing that machines can have intelligent behavior that's similar to humans or indistinguishable from humans. And just until recently, this was the kind of stuff that we only really saw in movies.
Correct.
But in some cases, we're seeing that technology's ability to synthesize what humans do is even surpassing what humans can do. And as a result of that, over 100 tech leaders recently petitioned for a pause on AI development. The European Union just adopted this past week the Artificial Intelligence Act, and they classify AI into 4 areas: limited risk, generative risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk.
Wow.
But in the UK and the US, we're not quite moving as swiftly. And despite in the US, that Chat GPT CEO met with the White House and Congress and urged them to regulate Chat GPT.
That's a lot. That's a lot that you've said, and that's really a lot to unpack, because as educators and as citizens of the world, we sometimes look at things and we say, wow, this is amazing, and definitely it can be used in the scope of education, Chat GPT, but we have to think broader picture too. And the fact that it has been classified into different risks, the limited risk, the generative AI, the high risk, and the unacceptable risk, really goes to, shows us that there's a lot more about Chat GPT and just artificial intelligence that, the lay person or the common person does not know, and how there can be very negative implications or negative consequences if it is not used, and most importantly, monitored, which
Yes.
is, I think what you were saying. So
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about what the U.S. has done, because you said that the U.K. and U.S. aren't moving quietly so swiftly. So tell me a little bit about what's going on here in the U.S.
Well, Congress still hasn't taken action on this. And
Wow.
that's true for a lot of stuff in the tech world, where
Yes.
we're always playing catch up.
Right.
But the White House, just this past fall, launched the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And it's intended to respond to the experiences of the American public and informed by the insights of researchers and advocates, policymakers. And it's really a framework that it's called From Principles to Practice, and it's anyone that's seeking to incorporate these protections into just that, policy and practice.
Right.
There are steps for actualizing the principles, and it provides guidance to automated systems and how they can meaningfully impact the public's rights, opportunities, or access to critical needs. And it classifies them into different areas, and some of these are safe and effective systems, algorithmic discrimination practices or protections rather, data privacy, notice and explanation, and human alternatives, consideration, and fallback.
So I'm thinking of every time what you're saying, I'm thinking about every time I get like an upgrade, or in my phone, and they have you read all, they have you scroll through these thousands of pages, and
Yes.
none of us ever scroll through it, right? We just
Right.
go, we never read it, and we just go, I accept, right? And then that's how we're able to get whatever we're And I think it's very interesting that I think that's where this is coming, right? That literally there have to be protections, there have to be regulations, there have to be, because it's obvious. And for those that haven't used Chat GPT, I really do hope that after this, you guys do just at least go in and play around with it. And David, when we get in a little more into the podcast, we'll give you some examples of it. But I think when you get into it, you can realize very quickly how this really needs to be regulated and monitored, because anyone can go in, ask it a question, and it might not be the answer that we need to be getting, and it could really, really influence a group of people or someone in the wrong way. So, I'm so glad that the U.S. is already taking those steps. Now we just gotta pray that they all come together and they actually make a decision and they do this, because unfortunately, there have been situations where our legislators are dragging their feet on a few things. So we're going to cross our fingers and hope that that gets done quickly. So talk to me a little bit about where Chat GPT is available right now.
So Chat GPT isn't available all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And I think this is important to understand. In addition to some of the regulation that we were talking about earlier, it has been an increasing target of censorship. There are multiple countries that have banned it, such as China, Cuba, Iran, Italy, North Korea, Russia, Syria. But there's also lots of countries that, for reasons that are unclear, and perhaps because ChatGPT is based in the US, there are some US regulations that are causing this. But there's many countries over the earth that there is no access to ChatGPT. And this raises questions about equity issues, because many of these countries are poorer countries.
Right.
And if advanced societies have easier access to advanced tools to improve their society, well, then we can reasonably predict that the divide between developed nations and emerging economies is only going to widen.
That's deep, David. That's very deep and very disturbing, right? Because especially in our work where it's all about equity,
yes.
that's very significant what you're saying. Let's talk a little bit about, so I see there are so some countries don't even have it, right? Talk to me about censorship in the United States.
Yeah, so censorship in the US at this point is largely being driven by academic dishonesty concerns. And we're talking about K-12 institutions of higher education. And the irony is that it doesn't mean that teachers and students don't have access to it. It just means they don't have access to it at their schools or places of learning. Because I know lots of teachers that are using ChatGPT and students are using ChatGPT.
Oh, yes.
They're just not connected to the school setting network. And this is a bit of a paradigm shift, because in the classroom setting, in the past, when the internet first came on board, there were websites that were helping students in different ways, and they have progressively been helping students. And now the student doesn't really have to decipher information from web searching. They can just ask it the question and there's the answer. So it kind of reignites the question of, like, what's the point of school?
Right. And before we talk a little bit more about that and unpack that more, I know that I work for, on a part-time basis, because I have so much time on my hands that I work for several universities as an adjunct professor. And just recently, most of the universities have been sending us emails that now turn it in, which is what most universities and even secondary schools use when it comes to papers. Now it has a component where it can check. I guess it's some type of algorithm formula, where now it can check if what you are submitting is actually artificially intelligence generated, right? So before ChatGPT Turn It In was just looking for just straight plagiarism, right? From a website. You cut and paste as a website, you put it in, Turn It In would be able to tell you 90% from this website, right? Now, right. Turn It In has the component that it's also picking up artificial intelligence generated work. So interesting how when we're talking about, how ChatGPT is being used in higher education and in K-12 education, that Turnitin has already, gone on, and I'm sure others have already gone on and said, listen, we're going to be able to catch when students are not doing their own work. And it's sort of, David, I'm torn, right? Because I've used Chat since you introduced me to ChatGPT. I use it for everything, right?
Yes.
Because it just provides amazing, amazing outlines. Obviously, I can't cut and paste it because my work is very individualized to students and to schools, right? So I just can't get what ChatGPT is giving me and say that that's going to be whatever I'm going to use. But certainly it gives me a phenomenal outline and a basis so I can start putting my work together. So I'm torn because I really feel that ChatGPT is phenomenal, especially for a student. My work is working with a disability. For a student that has executive functioning issues and has a difficult time organizing all of their thoughts. So if you have it's almost like some assistive technology, because that's what this would be, that can help you organize your thoughts, and then you go in and add your own meat to it, right? Your words. I really think it's phenomenal. But I also see how there are students or there are people that can take advantage and actually cut and paste. And it's hard to cut and paste. You can't cut and paste anyways, but to cut and paste and just use that as their work. So it goes back, and going back to your question of that, it does reignite the question of what is the point of school if we have an artificial intelligence that is giving us all their answers, right? So is there a potential for this academic tool to cause some displacement?
Sure. I mean, when we think about tools that are readily used right now, Khan Academy, iReady, other tech tools that educators are regularly using in the classroom that are intended to guide students through the process of learning. Well, if the student has the question that they need to create the answer for, they could just input it here, and who knows. And so I start thinking about, okay, Common Core was created because students were now having this easy access to broad amounts of information. And they needed to be able to synthesize like what is actual, what's not actual. We need to be able to think about this information. And so now that that's really not needed anymore with the advent of ChatGPT and other generative forms of AI, it just kind of wonders like what standards are next for educators.
Right. I agree with you. And so when we're thinking about just where ChatGPT can go, right? Because in our world, we're focusing on K-12, but we also know that we're preparing students for the workplace, and we're preparing the students for post-secondary. So what is that paradigm shift, I would say, between the workplace and institutions of learning when it comes to ChatGPT?
Sure. I think something really interesting here that I've seen in lots of places of work, and in fact, really, you've even talked about it, how you're using ChatGPT to improve your work life balance, to like just make your outcomes better.
Yes.
And yet in lots of workplaces, I'm seeing this where there has been this like shift to like, how can we improve our employees' output and all of these things, but yet in the school we're like, no, don't use it, that's bad.
Right.
And so I think we have a little bit of this balance here in messaging that schools are supposed to be the places that prepare kids for the future, but at least at this moment in time, we're just not accepting ChatGPT as part of it. And I think it's great that we're going to be able to talk about how ChatGPT can be used in the classroom, because it really is a great tool.
Yeah, it is. And I think that for the teachers that have used it, I think many of them do see the benefits of it, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But I do think that administrators and district leaders are maybe not as, they're more concerned about the academic dishonesty part, and they're not really focusing on the beauty behind using ChatGPT and how it would really help include all students, which is part of what Teach the Way They Learn podcast is all about. Just give them another tool in their kit or in their set to be able to access their education. Talking a little bit about just schools in general, and talking about the departments that we have in our schools. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about student service. I'm thinking about, is there potential for a student service displacement,
Sure. I mean, Lily, as we talk about schools in general, there's a lot of roles at schools that are intended to support students, and particularly in the student services area, you have your college advisors, and you have your occupational specialists, and you have different people that provide future orientation to students, or provide grief counseling or bereavement, or whatever it might be. But if now we have a model that interacts freely with students, is it possible? I mean, I've already started reading in some places where there are concerns, because the opportunity is there, that children, instead of orienting themselves toward a trusted adult at school, like, hey, can you help me figure something out? They're now orienting themselves to the chat bot. And what does this mean for social development for our children? I don't know.
Yeah. And as it is, we are already struggling with social and emotional development as a result of the pandemic. We're still feeling that. So I think that that's definitely food for thought, right? Talk to me a little bit about the World Economic Forum. I know that in one of my papers for my doctorate, I spoke about them, and I believe I saw I had to see a few videos on them and the importance of the World Economic Forum and how it meets and so on. So talk to me a little bit about the World Economic Forum and their involvement with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence.
Sure. So they have launched Teach AI to guide governments and educational leaders in aligning education with this increasing AI world, and in connecting the discussion of teaching AI to teaching about AI and computer science. So they're focusing on things like policy recommendations, developing a global framework for computer science, which includes AI. And this is the K-12 science, computer science framework, as well as making sure the public has an opportunity to participate in global stakeholder participation through reports and webinars and convenings.
Amazing. And so when we talk about and I highly recommend that if you haven't read about the World Economic Forum, please do so. And in fact, Ross, let's make sure that we add a link to the World Economic Forum when we post this, because I had no idea that it existed. I learned about it through my doctoral studies, and the work that they are doing is truly phenomenal. And it's all about ensuring that that everyone has access, and it's almost like very much so like access for them to be able to live better lives, for humans to live better lives. And that's right, David.
Yes.
And that's really what I like. And we were talking, the smartest people in the entire world are a part of this of these forums, and their conferences is pretty amazing when you see who is there. So I want to sort of now start focusing on just teachers and how they can use. So we've given the global, and I want to just start, making the podcast a little more detailed to teachers. So going down now, focusing on teachers. Tell me how teachers can utilize Teach AI coming from the World Economic Forum.
Well, that specific program, for those interested in learning about Teach AI's resources and future resources that are still being worked on, they can go to teachai.org and select the Get Updates button, or on the homepage, there's information there as well. Educators that are interested in taking a more active role can also be more active by joining they have a Teach AI option, and you can participate in research and the different kinds of work that the organization is conducting.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure that we add that as a link. Thank you for bringing that to the attention of our listeners. So let's talk about AI in the workplace, because I know we've got people here that might have a child in education, but they have a job, and I know that just from the rumors I've heard, I know that some people are a little worried about how AI is going to impact certain positions in the workplace. So talk to me about how is AI affecting the workplace?
Sure. So, staying with the World Economic Forum,
Right.
they reported that generative AI is going to impact 40% of working hours. So, like 40% of your work time. And this is across all industries.
My
And so
God.
some will have more than others, and some will have a sharp growth, and some will have a sharp decline. But we're seeing that some of the fastest growing jobs are going to be AI and tech related. And some of the fastest declining jobs are going to be like bank tellers and postal service clerks, cashiers. But in their future of jobs report released last month, the World Economic Forum estimate that 44% of worker skills, so now we're talking about skills,
Right.
is going to be disrupted in the next 5 years. Cognitive skills are reported to be growing in importance most quickly, and just demonstrating the importance of complex problem solving. Surveyed businesses reported creative thinking to be growing in importance and more important than analytical thinking. Technology literacy is also growing, self-efficacy, social-emotional attitudes, which we've talked about before, curiosity, lifelong learning. There's definitely going to be a lot of impacts here into the workplace.
Definitely. And I want to go back because I think that list that you provided when we were prepping for this podcast, the top 10 fastest declining jobs. It's interesting. I know you only mentioned a few of them, but I think it would be important to mention just most of them. But you said bank tellers and related clerks, postal service clerks, cashiers and ticket clerks, data entry clerks, administrative and executive secretaries, material recording and stock keeping clerks, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll clerks, legislators and officials, statistical finance and insurance clerk, and door-to-door sales workers, news and street vendors, and related workers. That's a lot, David.
Yes, it is, Lily.
I mean, many people work in those fields or a subset of within that field. So I mean, that just, it's mind blowing what you're telling me and what we're listening to and how, and again, all of that is going to significantly impact K-12 education, right?
Absolutely.
So when you look at the end, in mind, you're thinking, wow, these are positions that we really need to be reconsidering. How are we educating our children? Because we're going to graduate them, but are they actually going to have a job to go to? So it's really deep rooted, the declining jobs, on how the decisions that we're going to make on how we're driving education in a K-12 system as a result of AI, right?
Yes. That's absolutely right.
I mean, wow, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. Tell me about the more contemporary impacts that you think Chat GPT is going to have to society.
Oh, Lily, this is just fun. All of the stuff that's happening right now. I mean, it's there are inflection points happening right now. So, like, for example, the Writers Guild of America, they have been on strike for over 2 months. This is going to impact entertainment this fall because shows are not being written for release this fall.
Right.
And
nothing is being recorded. Nothing is being done right now. Nothing.
Right. And one of the key issues in their collective bargaining is Chat GPT and artificial intelligence. And we've seen it in other spaces too. The Directors Guild of America, in their collective bargaining agreement, acknowledged, quote, that artificial intelligence is not a person and cannot replace directors on film and television projects. The Grammys, they updated their guidelines to require that submissions for recognition have to have meaningful human contribution. A Sony World Photography winner just this past month rejected the award he won because he used artificial intelligence to create it, and he wanted to spark conversation of like, well, is it going to be humans or is it going to be computers that are going to be recognized?
Right.
In New York City, 2 attorneys have been penalized by the court because the legal briefings they created for a case they were working on was made by Chat GPT.
Oh my God.
And it included fictitious information.
Oh my God.
And so they were sanctioned by the court. The United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, recently shared that the alarm bells of generative AI are deafening and declared AI an existential threat to humanity, on par with the risk of nuclear war if we're not paying attention. And he added, it's fueling conflict, death, destruction, and threatening democracy, human rights, public health, and climate action. So it has its downsides, but it also has amazing, great positive sides. We're seeing it being used to advance medicine, improve people's lives. The University of Texas just launched that it used AI powered by Chat GPT to non-invasively mind read human brain scans. So Lily, imagine people with communicable disorders can now communicate with others again through mind reading. Just like, how wonderful is that? Nanobots that can travel in our body will become more commonplace with bionics. Just recently, a Dutch man who was paralyzed for 12 years was able to walk again due to Bluetooth technology. I mean, cochlear implants.
Yes.
The more brain-machine interaction we see, the larger the transhumanism movement will become. And like the TV series Upload, I don't know if you've seen this, but it tells the story of how humans at the end of their natural life can upload themselves into the virtual clouds. And, you know, how is their virtual afterlife? And while it's intended to be a comedy, it just like brings to the question, like, could this really be happening?
Could this actually happen? Right.
So we got to pay attention to what's happening around us.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling more Star Trek vibes than ever, right?
Like, yes, yeah.
Actually, you know, are we actually going that route? You know, because the more and more, because that's, you know, that's where this is headed. Obviously not to there, but I mean to the point that it's just gonna, what we thought was impossible,
yes,
it's not going to be impossible anymore. I mean, I'm sure at one time in our life we never realized the internet. We never realized just go to the basics. You know, electricity, right?
Yes.
Just the basics, guys. Right? Telephone, right? Just this is going to be that. This is going to be that and more. This is going to be that and more. Tell me about how else Chat GPT is being used. You gave us a great explanation on the pros and the cons. I'm very happy with the pros. I see a lot of, just for my passion and my field, I see a lot of benefits for students with disabilities, and even more so adults with disabilities, right? Because many adults with disabilities still are discriminated against and are not able to get a job. Right. So I know that all this assistance would help them. Tell me how else ChatGPT is being used.
Well, ChatGPT is being infused into other technologies. And so, for example, like Microsoft Bing, which is a web browser that competes with Google, is now using ChatGPT to curate searches. So like when we enter something into Google, a lot of times we have to open the link and read what's there. Do we like what's there? Close the link, go back to the main one. And you know, we do this.
Which one applies?
Right. Well, instead of us having to do that, ChatGPT just curates all of the websites and gives you little summaries of what's at all of these. And it's, you know, essentially it prepares everything for your viewing. And so we're now seeing also that Microsoft is going to launch Copilot, which can do all kinds of things like auto respond to your email on Outlook, analyze spreadsheets and for trends in Excel, create presentation decks with a few verbal instructions in PowerPoint, compose in Word, and so on. I mean, it's just using the full force of ChatGPT. Google is not too far behind. They also launched their own generative AI model. It's called Bard. And I've had the opportunity of putting them both up and asking them both the same question. They're very similar in output, but it is a little bit different. And so when I want to be a little bit more comprehensive in my research, like I like to check both. And I would be remiss if I didn't share that Google is going to launch soon Gemini. And Gemini is it's the generalized multi-model intelligence network. It's a multi-language model. And so it's not just going to be limited to written language, but it can include audio and text and video and imaging, and it's really going to transform how we interact in the digital space.
I'm speechless, to be very honest with you, because I talk to you a lot about this, and every time I talk to you about it, you just open my mind even more and more. I can always rely on David just to blow my mind away because he's just always so into what's currently happening, not only in education, but in the world, and how that the impact to the world is going to impact what we're doing with our careers and what we do, which is in K-12 education. So, well, David, I have to bring you back because we still got to talk about, how Chat GPT can be used in schools. So I think that you've done an amazing job on what is unpacking what Chat GPT is and why it matters. So I would love to know if you would be willing to come back so that we can now unpack a little bit about how we can use Chat GPT in schools.
I'd love to, Lily. I'm super excited about this.
Yes. I definitely, I hear it in your voice, and I think our listeners are hearing it as well. So, listeners, we're going to be back, and please listen for part 2 of our podcast on Chat GPT with Dr. David Calvo. And I want to thank everyone for listening in, and thank you for being so patient and letting me take my little hiatus from my podcast, because again, been working on many work projects and trying to finish my doctorate, just like Dr. Calvo has. So hopefully it'll be Dr. Salazar very soon. So I look forward to continuing this conversation next month on how Chat GPT can be used in our schools. Please share, spread the word, share this podcast. We want to make sure that we get as many listeners as possible. We at Academica Media feel very powerful about our podcast, and we want to make sure that we're sharing it with as many people as we can. I know, David, I'm not sure I told you, but Teach the Way They Learn is now on iHeartRadio. So I think that's pretty cool. So we're very excited about that. So I'll see you next month. Listeners, make sure you share. I'll see you next month so we can continue unpacking ChatGPT and how it can be used in the world of artificial intelligence and how it can be used in our classroom. And as I always say, always remember, if a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. Have a good one, guys.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.